Imagine I told you a story about 3 black men from the UK who started a podcast. The podcast has been going on for almost 4 to 5 years. They built an audience, they're doing well. In fact, I even had one of them on the podcast before. And the name of the podcast is called In My Opinion Podcast. They're one of the most happening podcasts in the United Kingdom amongst the black diasporan group. And then just 2 weeks ago, Michelle Obama decided to make a podcast called IMO. It launches and these guys are mad. Would you think that I was lying? Rewind! Just as I was saying before, Michelle Obama decided to start a podcast with her brother. And the podcast is supposed to be about this.
Post White House and writing the books and doing book tours, speaking at leadership conferences, things you do. As a coach, you realize that what we have, even in our lack of resources, in our household growing up, we had people who would share their opinions.
Sharing her opinions, which is interesting because I don't think that anybody really cares about her opinions. But it's interesting because it's called a IMO podcast, which is basically In My Opinion podcast. The problem is Michelle Obama made a great mistake here. Not only did she name her podcast after somebody else who had their name, she also stole the exact same lettering as the guy on the In My Opinion podcast. It's the exact same logo. She basically took their logo and their name. So these guys in the UK are not necessarily as big as Michelle Obama, but they're getting traction, especially in the Ugandan diaspora community. They are pissed off. And the main guy who's pissed off is a guy by the name of Sukali. And he's going to address Michelle Obama directly.
To our forever First Lady, Michelle Obama, we respect highly what you've done for the culture, for the American people, for the cause. Obviously, we are aware that you launched your podcast, and we don't think you did it maliciously. But we are 3 young black boys from London. We started a podcast 5 years ago. Since 5 years ago, we've trademarked the name In My Opinion Podcast, IMO Podcast. And we don't want our work to be drowned by your celebrity status. You know what I mean? You're big, you're powerful, you got a big machine. And we don't want our hard work to go amiss when your podcast launches. So we're asking kindly, please, spare a thought for us 3 young black men that are just trying to make a better place. Our podcast doesn't talk about misogyny, doesn't talk about putting down women. We uplift the culture, we uplift the community.
We're doing God's work.
Please, we really are. And we're just praying that you can reconsider the name you've chosen for your podcast as to not confuse our listeners and drown out our voice that we've worked so hard to build. Please, yes, Michelle Obama, we are praying that you will give us a chance. Let us talk and let's see what we can do to resolve this matter. From the boys at In My Opinion Podcast, aka the IMO Podcast.
And everybody that knows Michelle, please
tag her
in this, yeah.
Let us see this, or her team. We know Michelle's probably busy, won't have time for us, but if you could tag her team, please, Michelle Obama, please reconsider the name of your podcast so we don't have to lose out, as 3 young black men that were saying, yes, we can with Barack Obama. We still love you guys. Peace.
Now, people had mixed comments based on what was going on. So the people in the comments were upset, all right? And there was a mixed reaction. In My Opinion, with Michelle Obama and Craig Robinson's Yours is In My Opinion podcast, there's a huge difference here. Her name alone will always trump your podcast. Sorry, bro. Google MIO podcast. What do you see? Kako Diallo goes, In My Opinion podcast was created by these 3 guys. It's an old apps. Let Michelle respect herself. PPC says, actually, this may be a great idea because you can add your name In My Opinion podcast London's edition. Adjusting your name to that could be a blessing in disguise. Rose Gifter, you're not losing out. You're in the UK. Stick to your UK trademark. Also, people searching for her will find you. She just gave you discoverability and leads. If Michelle Obama was a man, would you pleading your case in this manner? You guys are just advertising Michelle Obama's podcast all the way from the UK. It's too late, bro. They have a website already. And then In My Opinion podcast goes, yeah, we saw this. Bro, stop showing too much respect and sue her. Stop being too humble. It's your chance to make money. Somebody else says they took the fonts and everything. And despite Michelle Obama's fanfare, people are somewhat disappointed with the podcast.
I did not know that Michelle Obama, alongside Craig Robinson, her brother, started a podcast. It just came across my feed today on YouTube. Sounds like there has been a bit of advertising through The View as well as Spotify. But in viewership on YouTube, it's reporting within the last 24 hours since launch, there has only been 109,000 views. Decent rating in the likes. As you know, YouTube sometimes hides the dislikes, but the comments tell the story.
But let's get back to these guys. These dudes are young. They're just starting out. Well, they've been in the game for less than 4 years. The lady has not only taken their name, right? And I could say In My Opinion or Opinion Podcast, whatever, that can be common. But to take their exact name and logo, to take their same font style, that's not by coincidence. I honestly believe that Michelle Obama and whoever started her podcast looked over and saw that font style and said, listen, those guys are in the UK, nobody knows about them, and we're gonna just push our agenda ourselves because we are bigger, we are stronger, and they really just can't sue us. And this is something that happens not only in just the content creation business, but especially amongst Black content creators. You see, it's really hard to build a Black audience online. Even though there's a lot of room for it, it's still hard. Even in almost every sector, you have so many celebrities making content now. Look at the sports world. You got Gil Zarina now. You got Club Shay Shay. You got Camerons and Mace. It Is What It Is podcast. So it's harder for the smaller content creators to get on, right? Now the people that have huge audiences, you know, there were ex-presidents or business coaches, former athletes, everybody's coming onto the platform now. So it's even harder to get recognized than just it was 4 or 5 years ago. When I started O'Shea Duke Jackson, it was like in 2015, 2016. Now starting with all of these guys that are coming from, you know, the NBA, the soccer leagues, and the NFL, and they have big budgets and great production, it's hard to compete with these guys. So I can understand the In My Opinion guys being upset because, yeah, they're young. They're from a market that's relative to them, which is the UK market. And, you know, for the Black market, you know, in the UK, it's also smaller because it might be more difficult for them to relate, you know, to the larger African-American market in certain cases. So they need all the help they can get. Now, some people are going to say, well, you know what? Her podcast is going to help, you know, search their podcast. And I just don't think that's true because their podcast is so unique to Africa and the African diaspora, right? And while that could be interesting, it's not. Michelle Obama's podcast and their podcast are for the most part for two different groups, two different countries, two different age groups that are at two different points in their life, okay? Michelle Obama's podcast is probably gonna be largely female, and these guys are gonna be more Gen Z, people in Africa or in the diaspora. It's messed up that Michelle Obama has stolen these guys' things, in my honest opinion, and doesn't want to apologize. But hey, that's kind of what Democrats do, right? So guys, what do you think? It's your boy O'Shea Duke Jackson back with an episode of Fair Use. I'm out.